Rain blurred the world into silver ribbons and mud. It didn't fall, it hunted, clawing sideways across the open prairie, sweeping through the bones of a broken wagon half swallowed by the ditch. The mare lay motionless, breath steaming once, then gone. Beside her, a young woman knelt in the rain, her bridal gown the color of dust and blood. She tried to stand, but the soaked lace clung to her legs like ivy, dragging her down. Her name was Alara Whitcomb, 26, barely a bride and already a ghost in the storm. Her veil had torn free miles back, yet she still reached for it, fingers trembling as if she could gather her old life again. White silk, a ring, a name spoken under a church roof. All gone. She pressed her palm to her temple, remembering the shouts, the gunfire, the splintering of wood as her husband-to-be, and the hired men fled into the rain, leaving her in the wreckage. One moment a woman promised to the future, the next, abandoned cargo. The sky was low and gray as pewter. The wind sliced her breath, and her boots squelched through mud so deep she could taste the earth. She whispered a prayer, half delirious, for the storm to end, but the rain only thickened, mocking her faith with every drop. "Please," she murmured to no one. "Please, not tonight." Her body swayed. Somewhere beyond the hills, a wolf howled, the sound thin and hungry. She thought of warmth, of candles, of safety, and something inside her began to fade. She stumbled against the wagon's broken wheel, gripping the wood. The world spun. For a moment, she saw herself as she must look now. A dripping, ruined bride kneeling in the wilderness, veil gone, hair tangled, the rain turning her curls into ropes. Shame was a heavy thing, heavier even than fear. She fell forward onto her knees. The cold bit into her bones. When she blinked, she saw nothing but silver haze. The edges of the world softened. She thought she heard hooves, distant, patient, too steady for ghosts. A shadow approached through the downpour. A horse, dark and broad, steam rising from its flanks. A man sat astride it, bare-chested beneath a heavy wool cloak, rain beating over skin that looked carved from dusk itself. He moved without haste, as though the storm had been waiting for him. When the horse halted, the rider dismounted in silence, tall and unhurried. Alara blinked up, half afraid, half awed. His face was cut by weather and years. His eyes held no threat, only a calm that unnerved her more than any violence could. The wind tangled his black hair around his shoulders. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Don't hurt me." The man crouched beside her. He didn't answer. Instead, he unfastened the cloak and wrapped it around her shaking frame. His hands were rough, but his movements careful, as if touching glass. When she flinched, he froze, waiting. The pause stretched long enough for her to feel the rain ease between them. She whispered. "I can't go with you." He said nothing. The silence itself was its own kind of reply, patient, unjudging. Then he lifted her effortlessly, as one might lift something precious that had already suffered too much. The motion startled her, yet she couldn't resist. Her head fell against his shoulder, her lips brushing the skin of his collarbone, hot against cold. She caught the scent of pine, smoke, and rain-soaked leather. He placed her across the horse, mounted behind her, and the animal began to move. The rhythm of hooves through wet earth lulled her into fragments of thought. The vows she'd never spoken, the ring still heavy in her pocket, the sound of men abandoning her in the storm. The man's arm remained steady around her, anchoring her to this trembling world. When they reached his cabin, a low log dwelling crouched beside a swollen creek, the rain had softened to a steady hum. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. He dismounted and carried her through the threshold as if she weighed nothing. The warmth inside struck her like a dream. A small fire, its orange breath painting the walls, the smell of dried herbs and animal hide. He set her down near the hearth, where her reflection quivered in a pan of water. She looked foreign to herself, mud-smeared, eyes wide and hollow, dress clinging to every shiver. When he crouched nearby, she pulled the blanket tighter, ashamed. "Please," she whispered, "don't come closer." The man paused again. The fire crackled softly. He reached out only to place a cup beside her, a carved wooden vessel filled with steaming broth. Then he stood and moved to tend the fire. His body, massive and scarred, cast long shadows against the walls. The flames reflected in his eyes, ancient and unreadable. Alara sipped the broth, tasting salt and warmth. Tears blurred her vision, not from pain but from confusion. Why no questions? No judgment? She glanced at him, trying to find words, but her voice trembled. Why would you help me? He looked toward her but didn't speak. The storm filled the silence. She realized that perhaps language was a smaller thing than kindness. Her gaze followed him as he crossed to the corner where his tools lay. He cleaned a knife, replaced it on the table, then fetched a wool cloth. When he turned back, she thought for an instant that he might kneel and touch her again, but he only handed her the cloth and nodded toward her bleeding foot. That quiet gesture broke something in her. She wiped her ankle, feeling his eyes look away deliberately, gentleness disguised as distance. Hours slipped by. The fire softened the air, and her body began to thaw. The storm outside grew quieter, the sound like ocean waves against the walls. She drifted between waking and sleep. Each time she stirred, she saw him still awake, sitting near the door, back straight, hand resting on his rifle, but not in threat, as though keeping watch for something only he could sense. When she woke again, it was night. The rain had changed its rhythm, a lullaby now. He had placed a second log on the fire, and its glow turned the room gold. For the first time in days, she wasn't cold. She studied his face as he stared into the flames. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, a scar near his temple that caught the light like a silver thread. She tried to thank him, but the words tangled. I don't even know your name. His eyes met hers. The fire reflected in them like a distant sun. Talon, he said quietly. His voice was deep, steady, carrying a rhythm that seemed older than language. Talon, she repeated, tasting the word like a secret. You should have left me there. I'm cursed. He turned back to the fire. No one is cursed, he said. His tone was not argument, but truth spoken as softly as breath. The storm sighed through the cracks in the walls. She wanted to believe him. Yet shame was still heavy in her chest, the shame of being unwanted, discarded by the man who'd promised forever. She drew her knees to her chest and whispered, You don't know what they'll say. A white woman, here with you. He didn't flinch. The rain thudded harder for a moment, then slowed again, as if the world had bent its ear to listen. The rain, he said after a long pause, does not ask who it falls on. Something inside her trembled at that. The firelight blurred. She stared at her hands, the small cuts on her fingers, the ring that still circled one. She twisted it, and it slipped free, landing with a soft clink on the wooden floor. Talon didn't move to pick it up. He simply looked at her, then at the door, listening to the wind. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire's light flickered between them like breath shared in secret. Alara's head grew heavy again. She fought to stay awake, afraid that if she slept, she would wake alone once more. Her body resisted her will. The storm outside dimmed, and her heartbeat matched the slow rhythm of the rain. Her eyes fluttered closed, then open again. The man had stood, walking toward her with the lantern. His shadow stretched across her torn gown. She tried to whisper something, perhaps, thank you, perhaps, don't leave. Her lips barely moved. He knelt beside her and placed a rough hand over the blanket, steadying her trembling. His voice, low and calm, broke the silence. You're safe now, he said, the words like a promise carved in firelight. His hand lingered for a breath, not touching skin, only warmth meeting warmth through the wool. Her eyes searched his face, the world tilting toward darkness. He looked down at her, not as a man who claimed, but as one who guarded, and added, softer still, Come closer. The rain slowed to a whisper. The fire sighed. And in that moment before sleep took her, she wondered if mercy could sound like thunder fading away. Light slipped through the cracks of the cabin roof like thin blades of mercy. Alara woke to the hush of rain easing into mist, her breath visible in the cold air. The fire had burned low, its last coals breathing faint red beneath the ash. She lay still beneath the wool blanket, listening, first to the creak of the timbers, then to the rhythm of an axe outside, striking wood in measured patience. Each thud came like a heartbeat, steady, disciplined, belonging to a man who wasted nothing. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The cabin, the scent of smoke, the ache in her limbs, all blurred into dream. But then she felt the heavy ring missing from her finger and remembered. The wrecked wagon, the rain, and the silent Apache who'd carried her from the storm. Shame rose in her throat like smoke. She pushed herself upright. The blanket slid off her shoulders, revealing her torn wedding dress, now stiff with dried mud. She tried to smooth the fabric, a meaningless act of pride, then shivered. The room was simple: a table, 2 stools, a cot covered in furs, a shelf lined with herbs and tools polished smooth by use. Nothing decorative, nothing wasted. Only survival, honest and clean. The door opened, letting in the sharp scent of pine and wet earth. Talon stepped through, shirtless, his hair dark with rain. He carried an armful of split wood, dropped it near the hearth, and glanced at her. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away to stoke the fire. He didn't speak, and somehow that silence said more than comfort could. Alara's voice came faintly. You should have left me at the road." He didn't look up. "No road in that rain," he said. His voice was low, shaped by calm rather than indifference. She hesitated. "Then I'll go now. When the sun breaks." He added another log to the fire and stood. "You won't make it far. Your foot is torn. You'll walk into fever." She bit her lip, hating that he was right. "I don't need saving." He looked at her finally, his gaze steady, not cruel. "You already were." The words struck her harder than the storm had. She turned her face away, cheeks burning. He moved past her toward the door again, pausing only to leave a loaf of bread and a knife on the table. Then he stepped outside. The door closed, and the cabin felt too big for one heart. She tore a piece of bread, chewing slowly. The taste was coarse but clean. Outside, his axe struck again, echoing through the trees. She watched him through the window, his body moving with rhythm, neither hurried nor idle, each swing a kind of prayer. By midday the sky cleared to a pale blue. Steam rose from the wet earth. She stepped out, still limping, blanket draped around her shoulders. Talon looked up from where he was stacking wood. "Your fever's gone," he said simply. "I'm not your burden," she replied. "You don't owe me anything." He rested his axe head on the stump. "I owe the storm nothing either. Still, I live with it." The way he said it, plain without poetry, made her heart tremble. He turned away, busying himself with his horse, brushing the mud from its flanks. She found herself watching longer than she meant to, the way strength softened into care beneath his hands. A hawk cried overhead, circling low before landing clumsily on a fence post. One wing dragged in the dirt, feathers bent. Talon walked over, slow and sure, and the bird didn't flee. He wrapped it gently in a strip of cloth and brought it inside. Alara followed, curiosity overcoming distance. He laid the hawk on the table. "Wings broken," he murmured. "You can fix it?" "Maybe. If it wants to live." They worked together in silence. She held the bird still while he bound the wing with thin cord. His fingers brushed hers once, rough skin against trembling softness, and she drew back as though burned. He didn't react, but the air thickened between them. When they finished, he set the hawk near the fire. "It'll stay until it learns to fly again." Alara's eyes lifted. "And me?" "You'll stay until you can walk." She wanted to protest, but something in his tone, quiet authority without command, rooted her tongue. She turned toward the window, where the world glistened clean after rain. That night the sky froze clear. The storm's roar was replaced by the whisper of wind through pine. She sat near the fire, brushing her hair, trying to reclaim some order in her ruined self. Talon sat across the room, repairing a saddle strap, the leather creaking softly in his hands. "You live alone," she said, her voice small. He nodded once. "Don't you ever get lonely?" His eyes didn't rise from his work. Loneliness is for those who remember too many voices. She didn't understand, but the ache in his tone silenced her. She thought of her mother's parlor, of laughter that had sounded like glass breaking, of her groom's empty promises. Perhaps loneliness wasn't absence, it was presence unreturned. The hawk stirred, fluttering weakly. Talon rose, fed it small bits of meat, then returned to his seat. His movements had a ritual patience that drew her in. She wanted to ask more, to know why he spoke so little, why he had chosen to save her when the world had not. But words felt too fragile for what had begun to live between them. Later, as she folded the blanket near the hearth, she heard hooves in the distance, more than one. Talon's head lifted instantly. His hand went to the rifle propped beside the door. The sound grew clearer. Horses splashing through mud, men's voices muffled. He motioned for her to stay quiet and stepped outside. She peeked through the gap in the wall. 2 riders approached, one tall, one squat, both wearing town badges that caught the moonlight. "Sheriff Crow," Talon said, his voice level. The sheriff's tone cut through the air. "We heard a woman was seen with you. White, young, runaway bride maybe. You hiding her?" Alara's pulse pounded. She pressed her palm to her mouth. Talon didn't move. "I found no runaway. Only storm." Crow spat into the mud. "Careful, Blackbird. Folks don't take kindly to your kind keeping what ain't theirs." There was a pause, the kind that crackles before lightning. Then the sheriff turned his horse. "If she's here, she'll be taken back. Don't let the Savior act fool you, it won't save your skin." He rode off into the dark, leaving the warning hanging like smoke. Talon returned inside, closing the door quietly. Alara stood by the hearth, pale as snow. "They'll come again," she whispered. "I know. You'll lose everything for helping me." He looked at her for a long moment, the fire's light flickering over his face. "Then it will be well lost." She felt something break open inside her, part fear, part wonder. The storm outside had ended, yet somehow she sensed another beginning to rise between them. And when he turned away, the wind caught through the cracks again, carrying the faint sound of distant thunder, like a warning, or perhaps a promise. Snow began as a whisper that morning, flakes sifting down through the pines, weightless and slow, like ash from some forgotten fire. Alara stood in the doorway of the cabin, wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the white settle over the world. The air bit her skin, but inside she felt strangely warm. Weeks had passed since the rainstorm, yet the memory of that night still clung to her like a ghost. His voice, low and certain, "You're safe now." She no longer flinched when Talon's shadow crossed the room. They had learned to share the same silence, to let the house breathe between them. He spoke little, she spoke less. And yet something in the quiet began to change shape. Something tender, unseen, dangerous. The hawk they had mended now perched near the window. Every morning it tried to lift its wings higher, testing the air. Alara would feed it scraps and whisper to it, as though speaking to herself. "You're healing," she would murmur, smiling faintly. "Soon, you'll remember the sky." Behind her, Talon worked the grindstone, sharpening his knife with steady rhythm. "The bird will fly when it chooses," he said without looking up. She glanced back, the faintest spark of humor in her eyes. "And you think I won't?" His hand paused on the blade. "You could," he said softly, "but I don't think you will." The truth in his tone disarmed her. She turned away quickly, pretending to busy herself with the kettle. He had a way of saying things that were not questions, but still demanded answers from her soul. The day passed in quiet labor. She mended torn shirts, baked cornbread from what little flour remained, and watched snow crawl up the cabin walls. The wind moaned low in the chimney, and sometimes, between chores, she would find herself staring at Talon, at the way he moved with such patience, at the way the firelight carved his face into planes of bronze and shadow. In town, they would have called her fallen. Here, she was simply alive. That night, she dreamed of bells, church bells, wedding bells, ringing across a flooded field. She saw her groom's face, distant and proud, calling her name, and she saw herself turning away from him into the storm. When she woke, the cabin was still dark, and the fire had nearly gone out. Talon was asleep near the door, rifle beside him. His breathing was deep, even, untroubled. She rose quietly, fed the fire, and crouched near the embers. Her reflection danced in the iron kettle, eyes softer now, fear dimming to something steadier. When dawn came, The world was wrapped in white. She went outside, boots crunching through the snow, and fetched water from the creek. The air smelled clean, sharp as glass. Halfway back, she caught sight of him watching her through the smoke of the chimney, face unreadable. Later that day, while she stirred stew, she asked without turning, "You said once the river doesn't choose what it carries. Did you mean me?" He looked up from carving a handle for his axe. "I meant what the storm leaves behind." She smiled faintly. "And what if the storm left behind trouble?" He met her eyes then, steady and kind. "Then I'll carry it until it's no longer heavy." Her heart stilled. There were no declarations between them, only these small mercies wrapped in plain words. But the peace didn't last. By evening, the snow deepened and hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Distant, measured, too many to belong to a lone traveler. Talon stepped outside, scanning the ridge. "Riders," he said. "Town men." Fear crept up her spine. "The sheriff?" "Maybe." He turned to her. "Pack what's yours." "I have nothing." His eyes softened. "Then pack your courage." They watched the distant figures appear between the trees. For men on horseback, shapes against the gray. Talon motioned for her to stay inside. He met them halfway down the trail, snow crunching underfoot. She couldn't hear what was said, only saw gestures, hands pointing, heads shaking. When he returned, his jaw was set like stone. "They say your husband lives," he told her. "He's offering money to bring you back." Alara's breath caught. "He abandoned me." Talon nodded. "But the law doesn't care who left first. They see only the ring you threw away." She sank into the chair. The hawk flapped once, startled by her trembling. "They'll come again," she whispered. "They'll drag me back. Then I'll stop them. They'll kill you." He said nothing, only stoked the fire until it roared high again. The flames painted his face in gold and red. "Some things are worth dying quiet for," he murmured. That night, the cabin pulsed with silence. Snow pressed against the windows like ghosts listening. Alara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words until they felt like a prayer. In the middle of the night, she rose and stood by the fire, watching its heart glow. She wanted to tell him she was afraid, that she didn't deserve his protection, that the world outside would tear them both apart for even sharing this roof. But she couldn't wake him. Instead, she whispered to the flames, "If I had a name left worth saving, I'd give it to you." He stirred then, eyes opening without surprise, as though he'd heard every word. "You already did," he said softly. She froze, breath caught halfway between shock and surrender. The fire cracked, scattering sparks across the stone floor. His gaze held hers, calm, steady, and impossibly gentle. The next morning, the snow had stopped. A pale sun crawled over the ridge. They rode together toward town. Alara insisted, Talon reluctant. "You shouldn't face them alone," she said. "If they see me beside you, they'll know the truth." "What truth?" "That I'm not your prisoner." The road was silent, snow crunching under hooves, breath misting between them. The world seemed washed clean, yet every step toward town felt like walking into a furnace. When they reached the outskirts, the stares began. Men on porches, women behind curtains, whispers moving faster than wind. By the time they stopped near Hattie Dunn's inn, the street was lined with judgment. Alara slid from the horse, trembling but upright. Hattie came out first, apron still dusted with flour, her eyes wide. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "Girl, what have you done?" "Survived," Alara said simply. Talon dismounted, his presence drawing silence. Sheriff Crow stepped forward, coat buttoned high, hand resting near his gun. "This town don't take kindly to lies, Blackbird. You harbor a woman under false pretense, it's a hanging offense." Alara stepped between them. "He saved my life." Crow sneered. "And kept you as what, payment?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. The word savage hissed from someone's mouth. Talon didn't flinch. Alara did. "She's coming with us," the sheriff said. "No," Talon replied quietly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You'll stand against the law?" Talon looked past him to Alara. Only against cruelty pretending to be law. The words hung heavy, snow beginning again in soft flakes. Crow stepped closer, but Hattie's voice broke through. Enough, Mason. Let the girl speak. All eyes turned to her. Alara's heart hammered so hard she thought she'd fall. I was left to die, she said, voice trembling but clear. He found me, fed me, never touched me without kindness. If that's sin, then the church should burn its Bible. Gasps rippled. Crow's face hardened. Watch your tongue, girl. But Hattie smiled faintly. Maybe it's time someone else watched theirs. Crow spat and mounted his horse. You'll both regret this. He rode off, leaving the crowd silent in his wake. Alara turned to Talon. You can't stay here now. They'll come again. He met her gaze, calm as ever. Then we'll meet them where the fire burns brightest. She didn't know if he meant fight or flee. But as the first snowflake melted on his shoulder, she realized something had changed. She no longer feared the world's eyes. She feared losing the man who saw her without them. That night, back in the cabin, the hawk beat its wings once, twice, then soared through the open door into the starlit sky. Alara watched it disappear and whispered, Fly far. Behind her, Talon spoke softly. It remembered. She turned, eyes shining. So have I. He stepped closer, firelight flickering between them. Their shadows joined on the wall, trembling like a vow not yet spoken. Outside, thunder rumbled again, low, distant, promising the storm wasn't finished. Snow fell with the patience of forgiveness, blanketing the valley in white silence. The cabin looked smaller beneath the gray sky, smoke rising straight and thin from its chimney. Alara stood by the doorway, wrapping her shawl tighter. The fire behind her had burned low, and Talon was saddling his horse outside, breath clouding in the cold. He'd been restless all morning, listening to sounds only he could hear, glancing toward town as though the wind carried a warning. They won't stop, he said quietly, tightening the saddle strap. Crow won't let shame die easy. Alara's voice trembled despite her calm. Then we'll leave. Tonight. He shook his head. Running makes their story true. She stepped toward him, snow crunching under her boots. And staying makes you a target. He looked at her then, truly looked, the way a man looks when trying to memorize someone before battle. I've lived my life standing alone, he said. If I fall now, at least it'll be for something that breathes. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to make him choose safety over pride, but the words died when he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You've given me peace I didn't know I still deserved, he whispered. The snow grew thicker, flakes landing on his bare shoulders, melting into beads that caught the dim light like tears. She reached for him, fingers trembling, and he caught her hand gently, pressing it to his heart. If the storm comes, he said, stay behind the bell tower. No one will harm you while it rings. By mid-afternoon, the first riders appeared, dark shapes emerging through snowfall, their outlines wavering like ghosts. Sheriff Crow led them, hat low, rifle across his saddle. Behind him, half the town followed, curiosity and malice woven together in their eyes. Inside, Alara's pulse thundered. She stood near the window, watching as Talon stepped forward alone, shoulders squared, unarmed but unyielding. The town gathered near the small church at the square's edge, where the bell hung still and heavy waiting. Crow's voice cut through the cold. Step aside, Blackbird. This ain't your fight. Talon's calm carried farther than shouting ever could. Then why bring so many guns? Crow sneered. To make sure the law's remembered. Alara burst from the cabin, running through snow that reached her knees. The cold tore her breath, but she didn't stop until she stood between them. Enough, she cried. He's done nothing but protect me. Crow's gaze narrowed. You think they'll believe that? A white woman with a savage. You've already condemned yourself. The crowd murmured, uneasy. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared with cruel hunger. Alara's fear burned away, replaced by fury so clean it glowed. If sin is gratitude, she said, voice rising, then damn me proudly. Crow's face hardened. He raised his rifle. The sound of the hammer clicking echoed across the square. Talon moved instantly, stepping in front of her just as the shot rang. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him slightly before he dropped to one knee. Blood bloomed bright against the snow. Elara fell beside him, hands pressing against the wound. "No, no, stay with me," she pleaded, tears cutting hot paths down her cold cheeks. Crow's men hesitated. No one else moved. The wind carried only the distant toll of the church bell, once, twice, heavy and slow. It wasn't time for service, but Hattie Dunn had stepped into the chapel, pulling the rope with both hands, tears streaking her face. The sound rolled over the town like a command. Mercy, not murder. Elara looked up at Crow, her voice breaking. "You preach law, but you've forgotten God." The sheriff lowered his rifle. Snow fell thicker now, the storm swallowing sound. He turned his horse and spat into the snow. "Take him and go," he muttered. "But don't come back." The crowd dispersed slowly, shame written in their downcast eyes. One by one, they vanished into the white, leaving the square empty, but for the ringing that wouldn't stop. Elara helped Talon to his feet, her arm wrapped around him. "You need rest," she whispered, voice trembling. He winced but smiled faintly. "You still give orders like a queen." She half laughed, half sobbed, leading him toward the church. They entered the small sanctuary where Hattie waited, hands red from pulling the bell rope. She looked at them both and nodded toward the pews. "Sit," she said softly. "Let me fetch water." Elara pressed her shawl to Talon's shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. His eyes were half closed, his breath shallow. The church was cold, but the candles flickered as though refusing to die. "You shouldn't have come out," he whispered. "You shouldn't have stood in front of me," she answered. He gave a small, weary smile. "You said once you were cursed. Maybe I was meant to be your curse breaker." Her throat tightened. "And what if the world never forgives us?" He met her gaze, the storm reflecting in his dark eyes. "Then let the storm be our witness." Hattie returned with water, but before she reached them, the church doors slammed open. The wind howled through, scattering snow across the pews. For one terrible moment, Elara thought Crow had returned. But it was only the wind, wild, cold, unbridled. She rose, closing the doors again. When she turned back, Talon was struggling to stand. "You can't move," she said. "I can't stay," he replied, voice rough. "If they see me live, they'll hunt again." "But if they think I'm gone," he trailed off, swaying. Elara caught him, pulling him close. "Then I'll go with you." He looked down at her, and the pain in his face softened into something like peace. "You'll freeze out there. Then I'll freeze beside you." They stayed that way for a long moment, her head against his chest, his hand tangled weakly in her hair. The bell tolled again, slow, steady, marking an ending or perhaps a beginning. When at last he spoke, his voice was barely more than breath. "The bell rings for us both now." She drew back enough to see his eyes, still steady, still full of life. "No," she whispered. "It rings for the world that judged us and lost." Outside, the wind softened. Snow drifted quietly through the air, erasing footprints, forgiving everything it touched. They left the church just before dusk. The storm had gentled into a fine flurry, the kind that glowed gold under the lantern light. Hattie stood at the doorway, watching them go. "The mountain's no place for living," she warned. Elara smiled faintly. "It's the only place that's ever felt alive." Together they walked through the snow, her hand steady at his back, his arm across her shoulders. The path wound upward, toward the ridge where the world disappeared into white. Each step was slow, deliberate, sacred. Halfway up, Talon paused, breath shallow but eyes clear. "You asked once what the river carries," he said. She looked at him, heart breaking open. "Yes." He smiled faintly. "It carries names until they become songs." The church bell rang again in the distance, one last time, long and clear. Elara turned toward the sound, tears bright against her cheeks. "Then let them hear ours." The storm answered, low and tender, sweeping across the valley like a promise. And for the first time since the rain, She wasn't afraid of being seen.